What is the national debt? Well, it's a number that seems to grow without pause. Imagine this: you're on a shopping spree, but instead of using your own money, you're racking up a credit card bill that just keeps growing. That's basically what countries do when they go into debt. It's a problem that's getting bigger and scarier every day. We're talking about trillions of dollars here. It's like a monster that's slowly swallowing up economies around the world. And guess what? Your country is probably part of this mess. Let's see why it's happening, how it's hurting us, and what we can do to stop this financial freefall. Okay, so we've talked about shopping sprees and credit card bills, but it is more serious. National debt is basically when a country spends more money than it takes in. Think of the government as a giant household. They have bills to pay, things like building roads, schools, and hospitals. They also need money for things like defense and social programs. When they don't have enough cash on hand, they borrow money. This borrowed money is what we call national debt. We're talking trillions of dollars here. It's a mind-boggling amount of money that's owed. The United States is a perfect example of a country in debt trouble. Their debt is so huge, it's like trying to imagine a stack of dollar bills reaching to the moon. It's a problem that's been getting worse for years, and it's starting to cause some serious headaches. Yes, national debt is a big, scary problem. But what's feeding this monster? Let's get down to brass tacks. Why is this national debt thing getting out of hand? First off, governments love to spend money. They build roads, schools, hospitals, and fund programs to help people. These are all important things, but they cost a fortune. It's like running a giant business. Expenses pile up quickly. Then there's the temptation to cut taxes. Politicians often promise lower taxes to win votes. While this might sound good, it means less money coming into the government's coffers. It's like trying to balance a budget while cutting your income. Economic downturns are another culprit. When the economy tanks, government revenue drops as businesses and individuals earn less. At the same time, spending often increases on things like unemployment benefits. It's a double whammy for the government's finances. And let's not forget about interest payments. Every dollar a government borrows comes with a price tag: interest. The more you owe, the more you pay in interest. It's like a snowball rolling downhill, getting bigger and harder to stop. Beyond these core factors, there are several other significant contributors to the growing debt monster. The first one is foreign affairs and military spending. It often requires massive financial outlays. Wars, peacekeeping missions, and diplomatic efforts can be incredibly expensive. When a country doesn't have enough money on hand, it often turns to borrowing, adding to the national debt. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine is a prime example of this. Both nations have incurred substantial costs in terms of military hardware, personnel, and economic disruption. To fund these expenditures, both countries have had to rely on significant borrowing, which has contributed to their respective national debts. The war has also strained the economies of other nations involved in providing aid to Ukraine or imposing sanctions on Russia, indirectly impacting their debt levels as well. The conflict has not only caused direct military spending, but has also led to increased spending on humanitarian aid, refugee support, and economic recovery efforts. These additional costs further exacerbate the financial burden on involved countries. Next, trade deficits. They are another major player in this debt drama. When a country imports more goods and services than it exports, it essentially spends more money than it earns. To make up the difference, governments often borrow, pushing the national debt higher. For decades, the U.S. has imported more goods than it exports, leading to a significant trade imbalance. This imbalance has contributed to the nation's growing national debt. While the U.S. economy remains robust, The trade deficit is a long-standing issue that policymakers have struggled to address effectively. High corporate tax rates can also contribute to the problem because when businesses face hefty tax burdens, they may choose to relocate to countries with lower taxes. This leads to a loss of tax revenue for the government, which can worsen the debt situation. It's like chasing away your most profitable customers. It's bad for business and bad for the bottom line. Immigration is another huge factor influencing national debt. The economic impact of immigration is a hotly debated topic, with arguments on both sides. On one hand, immigration can boost economic growth. Immigrants often fill labor shortages, start businesses, and contribute to innovation. They also pay taxes, increasing government revenue. For example, the United States has a long history of immigration, and many argue that it has been a driving force behind the nation's economic success. On the other hand, large-scale immigration can strain public resources. Newcomers may require access to education, healthcare, and social services, putting pressure on government budgets. Some argue that this increased demand can contribute to rising national debt, but the overall impact of immigration on national debt is influenced by the number of immigrants, their skills, and the overall economic health of the country. These factors, combined with the core issues mentioned earlier, create a perfect storm for soaring national debt. But what does this mean for you and me? Let's find out. You might wonder why it's such bad news for the economy. Well, imagine you're trying to buy a house. You go to the bank and they tell you the interest rate is sky high. How would you feel? That's what happens when governments borrow a ton of money. To entice people to lend them cash, they often have to offer higher interest rates. This means it's more expensive for everyone, individuals and businesses, to borrow money. Less people buying homes, fewer businesses expanding. Not a good recipe for economic growth. But that's not all. The government is like a big, hungry kid in a candy store. When it borrows a lot of money, it's competing with businesses for those same funds. This is called crowding out. Businesses have less money to invest in new projects, hire people, and grow. Now, let's talk about inflation. When governments borrow excessively, they sometimes resort to printing more money. It's like trying to solve a money problem by printing more money. It doesn't work. Unfortunately, few economists seem able to explain coherently why a heavy debt burden can be harmful to the economy. This may seem surprising, but ask any economist why an economy would suffer from having too much debt, and he or she almost always responds that too much debt is a problem because it might cause a debt crisis or undermine confidence in the economy. Not only that, but how much debt is considered too much seems to be an even harder question to answer. But generally, too much money chasing too few goods leads to prices going up. And that's inflation. And it's bad news for everyone. All of this adds up to slower economic growth. Higher interest rates, less investment, and inflation create a perfect storm for a sluggish economy. And the worst part is we're passing this debt mess on to future generations, and we can't do anything about it currently. British economist John Stuart Mill explained in an 1867 paper for the Manchester Statistical Society, "Panics do not destroy capital. They merely reveal the extent to which it has been previously destroyed by its betrayal into hopelessly unproductive works." While a crisis can magnify an existing problem, the point Mills makes is that a crisis mostly recognizes the harm that has already been done. So, the debt monster isn't just a big number, it's a real-life problem with serious consequences for everyone. Debt drama, a global stage. Let's step back and look at some real-world examples of countries fighting with this debt monster. Greece is a classic case. They lived large for a while, borrowing money to fund parties and good times. But when the music stopped, they were left holding a massive debt bill. It was like waking up from a dream to find your credit card maxed out. Their economy tanked, and they had to make painful cuts to get back on their feet. It was a roller coaster ride nobody wants to experience. Japan is another story. They've been carrying a huge debt burden for years. It's like they've been using their credit card for everything from groceries to vacations, and now the bill is sky high. But unlike Greece, Japan's economy has managed to muddle through. It's like they've found a way to juggle all those payments without falling flat on their face. And then there's the United States, the world's biggest economy. They've been on a spending spree for decades, and the debt keeps piling up. And the problem is only getting worse. The federal government's debt is currently $33 trillion, and annual deficits just reached the highest in U.S. history outside of the pandemic years at nearly $2 trillion. Not only is the U.S. spending more than it's taking in, but the long-run growth in U.S. spending is outpacing the growth in its revenue. If the lessons from other countries dealing with similar problems are any indication, fixing this problem is going to require a combination of spending cuts and tax hikes. But there's a third factor that could help alleviate some of the pain involved, which is economic growth. Because the faster the economy grows, the less pressure there is to raise taxes and cut spending. These are just a few examples, but they give you a glimpse into the global debt crisis. It's a hard issue with no easy solutions. Maybe, but first, we need governments to tighten their belts. Governments need to spend within their means. It's like living within your paycheck. Easier said than done, but it's important for long-term financial health. Next, we need to rethink how we collect taxes. It's like finding new ways to fill your piggy bank without shaking it too hard. Governments need to find ways to increase revenue without crushing businesses or individuals. It's a delicate balancing act. Spending cuts are also on the table. Governments need to prioritize spending, focusing on essential services while cutting back on unnecessary programs. It's tough love, but sometimes it's necessary. Economic growth is the only solution. When an economy grows, it creates jobs and generates more tax revenue. It's a virtuous cycle that can help pay down debt. For countries in deep trouble, debt restructuring might be the only option. It's like renegotiating a credit card bill. These countries might need to extend repayment terms or reduce the amount they owe. It's not ideal, but it can provide some breathing room. So, while the debt monster is a formidable foe, it's not invincible. Maybe a better future is waiting for us. The COVID-19 pandemic threw the world into this chaos, and many governments had to dig deep into their pockets to support their citizens. This added fuel to the debt fire. Now, more than ever, it's important to tackle this problem head-on. Ignoring the debt monster is like pretending a leaky roof will fix itself. It won't. In fact, it will only get worse. We need our leaders to prioritize fiscal responsibility and make tough decisions. What do you think is the biggest challenge in tackling national debt? Let us know in the comments. Want to learn more? Hit that subscribe button for more financial breakdowns and economic insights. See you later.